limited it can become, it is time to leave behind all the beliefs, all the stories we have made up about money. Notice I said leave behind all the beliefs. I didn't say change the beliefs, and this is a very important point. All these self-help techniques, all these secrets someone tries to share with you about manifesting more money and more cars and more everything, are all based on several skewed premises, which is why they don't work for most people most of the time. For instance, they say you have the power to manifest anything you want. You don't. It's that simple. Despite what your ego wants you to believe, only your infinite eye can manifest something in your holographic experience, not you. They say you can attract money and cars and such into your life by meditating or praying or visualizing them or repeating certain affirmations. You can't, at least not on a consistent basis. We'll talk more in a minute about why this might work occasionally. They say all you have to do is change your beliefs, like the power of positive thinking. What's wrong with the power of positive thinking? Again, nothing wrong with it. It's perfect for the first half of the human game because it leads into such limitation. First, because it's thinking, which belongs to the first half, while feeling belongs to the second half. Secondly, because the player has no power. And thirdly, because it simply trades one belief for another. True, a positive thought might be better than a negative thought if you're in the first half of the human game. But in the second half, that's a judgment. And as we've seen, judgments keep us limited. Underneath all beliefs are judgments. If there was no judgment, there would be no need for a belief, and it would cease to exist. But if you try to change your beliefs without changing the judgment, nothing really changes at all. You're just substituting one belief for another while the judgment remains intact. If there really was a secret to manifesting everything we want, it would work for all the people who use it all the time. The actual result from all this self-help is that when it doesn't work, which means for most people most of the time, the person feels worse about themselves than when they started, thinking there is something wrong with them, that they can't do it right, that they're deficient or defective somehow. The ironic perfection is that that's exactly what every first-half technique or religion or theory is designed to do. Make you feel more limited. So I'm not suggesting you change your beliefs at all. I'm suggesting you see your beliefs for what they are, limiting filters on your perceptions, and leave them behind altogether. Even in the powerful example Dr. Lipton used in his seminar, where people saw one picture of fear with one set of glasses and another picture of love with another set of glasses, it was still trading one filter for another, and neither filter allowed you to see the whole picture. As players in the second half of the human game, we don't need beliefs. We don't need stories. What we need to do now is to see the whole picture, both fear and love, end our judgments of both of them, and, like triumph and disaster, start to treat those two imposters just the same. We talked in Chapter 24 about virtual reality in a machine. If part of your computer-generated virtual reality experience was to look at your bank account and see $1 million in it, I wonder whether you would say, this must be a mistake. I didn't earn that money. Most likely you would realize it was created out of thin air by the designer of your virtual reality experience and would not need to figure out how it got there. In fact, you would know how it got there. But according to quantum physics, life itself is a virtual reality experience, a holographic universe created for us by our infinite eyes. If we, as players, would stop needing some story about how money can come to us, it would take away all the limitations we put on receiving money and make the infinite eye's job so much easier. One question I hear a lot from friends, especially peace workers: how do we get our infinite eyes to create more money for us since we want to do good things with it? The answer may be difficult for some people to take. The question itself is a lot of the reason you may be having trouble. Why? First of all, the thought that you want to do good things with money is still a judgment. In fact, there's even one group who thinks there is something innately wrong with money and that it needs to be humanized, which they would be happy to do if you just give it to them. As far as your infinite eye is concerned, there are not good things or bad things that can be done with money. Money, like everything else, is neutral. Money does not need to be spiritualized or humanized or purified by using it for all the right reasons. There are no right ways or wrong ways to use money. That's just another judgment to let go of. As you recall, in the first half, the game was to see how much limitation a player could experience on the outside so the infinite eye could have an inner experience. That means the infinite eye can use money, for example, as a tool to create limitation. For some people, it might mean not having much money or none at all. That alone can produce a great deal of limitation. For other players, their infinite eye might choose to give them all the money they can have, even more than they can spend, and experience the limitations that come with wealth, like realizing that peace and joy are not the result of having a lot of money. I'm sure you know people who are wealthy but very unhappy at the same time. In fact, having money can often be more limiting than not having it. Or maybe an infinite eye gives its player money and they lose it and experience limitation in that way. Or maybe a player is very comfortable financially, but something happens to the economy and the player feels victimized by powers beyond its control when the fortune they think they worked so hard to create is suddenly gone. All of these possibilities and more can lead to limiting experiences in the first half of the human game. The bottom line is that it is the infinite eye who decides how much money you're going to have based on the experiences it wants you to have, and the best way it decides it can create those experiences. That's true in the second half of the human game as well. In the second half, the infinite eye wants you to enjoy infinite abundance, and that includes having all the money you want and need. But this isn't going to mean that as soon as you start playing the second half, your bank account is automatically going to be full to overflowing, because you still have judgments about money that you developed in the first half, and beliefs about how you can get that money that have to be dealt with. Better said, in the first half of the game, you assigned a lot of power out there in relationship to money. Who creates it, what you have to do out there to bring it in here, and so on. And as we've discussed, the first thing you will be doing in the second half is having experiences that show you where you have assigned this power in order for you to reclaim it and recognize the true source of abundance, your infinite eye. So, can we just ask our infinite eye for money, or pray for it? Yes, you can. You can send a message to your infinite eye in any way you feel is appropriate that you would like some money. You should feel free at any time to let your infinite eye know your wishes. which it probably already does, but it doesn't matter. Ask anyway. By the way, you only need to ask once. Your infinite I will hear you the first time and doesn't need a reminder. Asking more than once looks a lot like a judgment that something's wrong because you haven't gotten it yet. Remember, your infinite I may decide not getting what you asked for is the most appropriate experience for you and it, even in the second half. So you cannot have any expectations attached to your request when you ask. No need to have your wish fulfilled. Perhaps your infinite I has something else in store that might make you even more joyful and more abundant than what you are asking for. This was certainly true for me. My infinite I knew how much I loved the ocean, and sailing, and whales and dolphins. I often dreamt of living on a boat, but I had no money to make that happen. Instead of giving me a couple $1,000,000, my infinite I created an experience for me sailing around the East Atlantic Ocean on an 80-foot sailboat with some of my best friends, swimming with the whales and dolphins, playing music, and having the time of my life for a year. And it didn't cost me a penny. I could never have created that on my own, or even thought about that possibility. So why ask for money in the first place? If you want to ask for something, why not ask instead for what you know you're going to get anyway? Whatever experiences your infinite I wants you to have, along with all the money needed for those experiences. And if you're still in the phase of recognizing where you have assigned power out there about money, you really should be asking for experiences when you don't get the money you want, so you can clearly see the limiting judgments and beliefs you still have about money. But wait a minute, a good friend says to me. I decided I wanted a motorcycle, so I used the secret, visualized what I wanted, and I got one. Fantastic! I am sincerely happy for you and glad you got what you wanted. But I have to disagree with you about how you got it, since you have no power to create anything, and neither does some secret law of attraction. Only your infinite I could create a motorcycle for you, and I can think of a lot of other explanations of how and why you got what you wanted. For example, since I know you, I know what a really good man you are. And if I were your infinite I would give you a motorcycle too, just to reward you for what a great job you're doing as my player. I can also imagine it happened the other way around, that your infinite I wanted you to have a motorcycle and has wanted that for a long time, but your beliefs made it difficult to get one for you until you decided you could manifest one using some secret formula. That, by the way, is the one benefit of the secret and the law of attraction, that you expand your beliefs about how things can come into your reality. Or maybe your infinite I wanted you to begin to realize that it was the source of all your experiences, and deepen the connection and communication with you. And the best way it could find to do that was to give you a motorcycle, and then later give you this paragraph in this book to let you know where it really came from. The possibilities are endless. The only possibility that is not possible, is that you manifested the motorcycle, because it simply cannot be something you did independent of a holographic experience created by your infinite I. Recognizing that fact is an important step to take in the cocoon. Despite what the ego would like us to believe, that we have the power to create a motorcycle, for example, or money, or a house, or anything because of something we as a player did, this is one of those beliefs inside the movie theater that can only lead further into limitation. By design, it's important the player misassign the true source of its experiences in the first half, or the illusion would be broken and the game would be up. As I said, since I know you, I also know you've tried to manifest other things before, using this same secret, and they have not worked. What's important to understand is that it wasn't you who did anything wrong in those other cases. In fact, you, and all of us, have done everything perfectly as players, whether we realize it or not. The techniques we have tried to use to make our experiences different are what do not work. Yes, they all contain some truth and some workability some of the time for some people, but they are anywhere from slightly skewed to way off target in order to make the first half of the human game possible. Now that we're playing in the second half, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth can be revealed. And as players, we will be given new opportunities to experience something very different. For instance, off the top of my head, I can think of 6 general ways in which we blocked the flow of money in the first half of the human game that we might have to take a close look at in the second half in order to start behaving in the opposite way. 1. Having judgments and beliefs about money. 2. Wanting money because you think something has to be fixed, changed, or improved in your experiences or out there. 3. Thinking you have the power to create money. 4. Thinking you have to do something to get money. 5. Thinking money has to have a story of how it comes to you. 6. Not trusting the infinite I. We've talked a lot about most of these already, so let me just make a few additional comments. I know so many people who want money because they want something out there to be different. Maybe it's to save the whales, or end poverty or hunger, or create world peace. Noble thoughts, all of them, but still judgments that something's wrong and needs to be fixed, changed, or improved. Remember that the whales, poverty, hunger, war, and violence are showing up in your holographic experience created by your infinite I for a reason. In the first half of the game, the reason was to create more limitation. In the second half, it's to show you where you assigned power out there and forgot the fact your infinite I was creating everything in your hologram and none of it was real. So in the second half, it's doubtful your infinite I, who wants only infinite joy and abundance for you, will financially support the continuation of these first half judgments. One of the biggest beliefs to let go of is that we, as players, not only have the power to create money, but that we have to go out and do something in order to get it. In other words, to be proactive, especially when it comes to money. But, literally, there is nothing we can do. Our infinite I is doing it all for us, and our only part is to leave behind our judgments and beliefs and therefore be more able to receive the abundance trying to come our way. The fact is that we only think we have to do something because we have these made-up stories of how money can get to us. When we let go of those stories, money can start to flow in many different ways we can hardly imagine. Let me offer 2 examples, based on actual experiences, from a different gender perspective, beginning with ladies first. Your parents are about to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, and you've been working for months to collect pictures of them since they were very young to make into a movie celebrating their lives together. You found the final picture you wanted last night, and now you're ready to start creating the video. There is this really cool software program you ran across on the internet to make videos with music and voiceover and animation and everything, and it costs $119.95. When you paid your credit card bill last time, you knew you only had about $150 in available credit, and you also need some new shoes for work. But you are so excited about this gift for Mom and Dad that you decide to buy the software anyway and worry about the shoes later. The video is a total success, and your parents are very touched. When your credit card statement arrives, you still have $150 available credit. This doesn't make sense. You look and see your credit limit has not been raised, and then you notice the charge for the software program is not on the statement, although you had received confirmation of the charge from the company. Concerned that the company had not actually been paid, and not wanting to do anything unethical, you call them. Yes, we received payment for your purchase. No problem. So you decide to wait, expecting the $119.95 charge to be on the next credit card statement. But it's not. Nor is it on the next month's. You really need those shoes by now, so you purchase them on the same credit card. They don't show up for the next few statements either. In fact, none of the charges you make on this credit card are showing up on any statements, although the merchants and vendors are getting paid. Finally, as a second-half player, you realize your Infinite Eye is creating money for you in a new and very inventive way, and you express your deep appreciation. And now from a male perspective. You decide to go out to dinner with some friends, and you look in your wallet and see you've got $10. You get to the restaurant, look at the menu, and your mouth waters when you read about a T-bone steak. Your entire body is filled with joy at the thought of eating this T-bone, and your excitement grows with each passing minute. Then you see the price of the steak, $14. You remember you only have 10. Next you remember the news story last night that red meat is bad for you, and you decide you really shouldn't eat the steak anyway. Then you look across the table at a woman you have been dying to hook up with and realize she's a vegetarian who only eats organic food. And since you want to impress her, you don't want the steak after all. With each new thought, your excitement level goes down and down until you're no longer happy you came to dinner. Finally, you decide on a Caesar salad with no grilled chicken, which costs $7. So you'll have a little left for a drink and tip and tax. But no beer, because your doctor said you have to lose weight, although now you really want one. You leave the restaurant an hour later, without the woman of your dreams, sad and lonely and unsatisfied, and $10 poorer. On top of that, the Caesar salad was terrible, and the waitress was rude. You regret the whole evening. Or you decide to go out to dinner with some friends, and you look in your wallet and see you've got $10. You get to the restaurant, look at the menu, and your mouth waters when you read about a T-bone steak. Your entire body is filled with joy at the thought of eating this T-bone, and your excitement grows with each passing minute. Then you see the price of the steak, $14. But you remind yourself your Infinite Eye wants you to follow your excitement and joy, and will reward you when you do, now that you're playing the second half of the human game. So you order the steak and a beer. The woman sitting across from you eating her baked potato and broccoli leans over and whispers, "Strange. I really wanted a steak tonight, too. I wish I had ordered that." After dinner, saying she really enjoys being around you because you're such a free and happy person, she gives you her phone number. The whole night was a total success. The food was prepared perfectly, and the service was impeccable. Best of all, you wake up the next morning having lost a couple pounds. But wait! How did you pay for the steak? When the bill came, you looked in your wallet and there was $20, not 10. Well, you think, you must have miscounted before you left the house. Maybe. But just maybe your Infinite Eye changed your hologram and downloaded $20 into your wallet instead of 10 when it was clear you were not going to let your judgments and beliefs get in the way of your excitement. After this happens to you a few more times, you finally accept the fact your Infinite Eye has found another way to create money for you. Do this a few times. Give your Infinite Eye the opportunity to support your excitement financially, and your life will never be the same. Soon you'll be finding money in places you never dreamed of, receiving money in ways you never thought possible, and forgetting to look at your bank balance because you know it's not real anyway and can be changed in the twinkling of an Infinite Eye. Are you serious? Does this really work? Yes, it does. At least it has for me and many other people I know who understand how money works in a holographic universe. I'm not saying I always have a lot of money in my pocket or in my bank account, but I know without a doubt I have access to an unlimited supply of money through my Infinite Eye, and that I will always have all the money I need to have the experiences my Infinite Eye wants. And that's a fantastic place to be because I never have to worry about money again. It's really pretty simple. If my Infinite Eye wants me to have an experience, it will give me all the money needed for that experience. If I, as the player, think I want to have an experience, but my Infinite Eye disagrees with me, the money won't be available no matter what I might try to make happen. You can't get any simpler than that. But I don't think that's really the question. Most probably the real question on your mind is, will this work for you? Specifically, in the first half of the human game, we believed we had to be proactive, believed we had to do something, to make something happen. Out of that belief came others related to money, like having to work for it, or go out there and get it, or make other people give it to us in one form or another. In fact, the only ways we thought we could get money were totally dependent on other people, to whom we assigned a lot of power. In reality, even in the first half, our Infinite Eye was creating all the money we were getting as part of the holograms it downloaded to our brains, the amount of money limited, of course, by our judgments and beliefs about the ways it could come to us. It just looked like we were making money. It just looked like we were dependent on other people to give it to us. In the second half, we can leave all that behind with the absolute certainty that all the money we need for any experience will be part of any hologram our Infinite Eye downloads to us. But please don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting that all you do in the second half is sit in your chair and wait for the money to be magically deposited into your bank account, unless that's what brings you the most joy and all you're motivated to do at that moment. I am suggesting that whatever you feel excited to do, whatever brings you joy, is where you should focus all your attention and energy, rather than doing something that doesn't bring you joy because you feel you have to make money. Maybe the resentment and other discomfort you feel working at a job you don't like simply for the money is your Infinite Eye's way of saying, stop it, and find out what excites you to do the most regardless of the money. The only thing stopping most people from doing just that is fear. But who knows? Perhaps what really excites you would bring in more money than whatever job you hate now. There's only one thing I can guarantee you, based on my own experience and the results of testing and challenging this model. Once you've processed your judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears about money, your infinite I will have a much easier job getting the money to you to follow your excitement. And you will grow to trust your infinite I completely that it will provide all the money you need to have the experiences it wants. I could give you quite a few examples from my own life when money appeared in my bank account or my wallet for absolutely no reason. Exactly the amount I needed to do something and exactly right on time. And I have the paperwork to prove it. And I have no idea where the money came from. In fact, now I'm so used to money showing up out of thin air that I'm no longer surprised when it does. However, an infinite I's financial support doesn't always take the form of cash or credit card charges that never show up on a statement. Sometimes your infinite I, in its infinite wisdom and power, has a better way to create an experience for you that you thought was going to take cash. The year I spent on the whale and dolphin research ship is a good example, where it didn't cost me a penny, nor did I have to find $500,000 to build the ship. I will admit, however, there are times I wonder how my infinite I is going to pull this one off. For example, it became very obvious recently that my infinite I wanted me to go back to the United States for a while. I don't yet fully understand why, or for how long, and I was very surprised because I am so happy living in Europe. But it seemed like the flow was in the direction of home from reading all the ripples in the universal ocean, including almost magical coincidences of finding the perfect flight at the perfect time for the perfect price. But I still didn't have the money to pay for the ticket. I wasn't worried about where the money was coming from. In fact, if the money didn't show up, I would simply have understood that I was reading the ripples incorrectly and I wasn't supposed to go back to the States after all. But I did wonder, when the ripples became clear, how my infinite I was going to come up with a fairly large sum of money this time. In the past, as I said, it has just appeared in my bank account, and I expected something similar in this case. But that's not what happened. Instead, a friend loaned me the money. Normally, I don't like borrowing money from people. I used to do that inside the movie theater, but hadn't since I walked out the back door, making it clear to my infinite I that I wasn't totally comfortable with that method of getting money to me, a judgment of mine about other people's money. However, my infinite I chose this opportunity for me to let go of this particular belief on how money can come to me, letting me see the judgments and fears and layers of the ego underneath, and reminding me other people are in my hologram to set something in motion to support me. In fact, I could accept this loan from my friend because I also knew with certainty it was what his infinite I wanted to happen for him, although I may never know why. Here's the best way I can come up with to explain this in a nutshell. We're playing a very sophisticated video game, using the Earth environment template, but designed uniquely for each player by their infinite I. That infinite I has certain experiences it wants its player to have, outer experiences in order for the infinite I to have the inner experiences. In most good video games, a player needs certain things to play, stay alive, and make it to the final destination, such as weapons, ammunition, energy packs, special tools or skills, keys, clues, and so on. In our video game, we need a lot of things as well, but mostly we need money so we can buy everything else. In a video game, the designer creates everything and makes it available during the game, so all the player has to do is find it and grab it and add it to their inventory. In our video game, the same thing is true. All the money we need to play, stay alive, and make it to our final destination is created by our infinite I, since we as a player have no power to create anything, and it's all right there for the player to take. So it's the job of the infinite I to create the money we need and make it available. It's the job of the player to find it and grab it. Finding it, however, is made difficult when the player believes the money can only be in certain locations, and they can only get it if they work for it, or win it, or inherit it, or... When a player lets go of these belief systems about money, they can begin to see it in many different places, and their infinite I can make it more easily available. But it's still the player's job to reach out and take the money. That's what's meant about a player having totally free will over their reactions and responses to the experiences created for them. I could have, for instance, not taken the loan from my friend to buy my airline ticket back to the States, choosing instead to hang on to my judgment and belief about other people's money. In that case, I would not have been able to ride the ripple and follow the flow in the direction my infinite I was offering. So there are two basic reasons I can give for this phenomenon I experience with money. First, I have let go of virtually all my judgments and beliefs about money. And secondly, I have taken off almost all the limits on the ways my infinite I can get that money to me, giving it many more possibilities. I will admit, however, having money just appear in my outstretched hand would still freak me out. Maybe one day. Chapter 31. The Ego. Question. You've been pretty hard on the ego throughout this book. Isn't that a judgment in itself? Answer. Excellent point, and I'm glad for the chance to clarify it. First, let's make sure we agree on what we mean by the ego, since that word has been used a lot and means different things to different people. In this book, I have used ego to mean the personality construct we create while playing the human game. It is composed of many layers of false identities we assume as we encounter the limiting and restricting holographic experiences in the first half. In fact, the ego is what allows us to play the first half of the game. Otherwise, we could not form our judgments, beliefs, and opinions and fulfill our purpose for the infinite I. All of our fears, for example, with the fear of non-existence as the most basic, are the result of some threat to one or more layers of the ego, which fights back for its very existence. In that sense, we can express great appreciation to the ego for the role it has performed so well while in the movie theater. It, too, was as perfect as everything else in our holographic experience. The process inside the cocoon, as I have described it, is becoming aware of all these layers of the ego, the false identities we have assumed, and letting go of them. It's a process of finding out who we are not, and then ultimately finding the true answer to who we are. But we have assigned the ego a lot of power during the first half of the human game, and we have rewarded it time and time again for the good job it has done, to the point that it seems to have taken on a life of its own. In his Enlightenment trilogy, Jed McKenna actually personifies the ego, making it female and calling it Maya. The goddess Maya, architect of this magnificent palace of delusion. Maya, goddess of confusion and misdirection. Maya, lord of the prison of duality. End of quotes. Jed speaks a lot in terms of fighting a battle with Maya on the road to becoming a butterfly. Maya, goddess of delusion, has been doing her job with supreme mastery since the first spark of self-awareness flickered in some monkey's brain box. This is Maya's house. She controls everything. She has every advantage. We are patients in Maya's asylum. Thumb through any magazine, flip through the channels of the TV, go wherever there are people, and you'll see nothing but a morbidly juvenile, fear-infected, stunted, runtish race over which Maya reigns supreme and unchallenged. End of quotes. And Jed seems to think Maya will win a lot of the time. You think you're on top of something, but the only thing to be on top of is Maya, and she's on top of you like a house on a mouse. This is the one true war of which all others are but shadows, and for which all other conflict is but a metaphor. In the short term, Maya almost always crushes the rebellion. By my estimate, her win-loss ratio is better than 100 million to 1. End of quotes. It should not surprise anyone that when you begin to dismantle the ego in the cocoon, the ego will fight back. It knows it is literally fighting for its life, because if you follow through with the process and spiritual autolysis, the end result is its virtual annihilation. We will never eliminate the ego completely as long as we have a body and play the human game. But we should not make the mistake of judging or blaming the ego, or view the transformation into a butterfly as an all-out war with the ego. After all, the ego is simply another piece of the hologram that isn't real, but only looks and feels real. And it has played its part perfectly in our holographic experiences, just like anything and anyone else we have encountered while playing the human game. Any other approach will continue to assign power to the ego it does not possess on its own. As Jed says, fear of truth is the foundation upon which Maya's palace of delusion is erected. She has no power but that we give her. Viewed this way, the idea that Maya is evil, that delusion is negative, that the dream state is a prison, or that the dualistic universe is anything other than the grandest and most wonderful of all blessings, is laughably absurd. Why hate Maya? Where would you be without her? If you planned a walking tour from Maine to Florida, starting in January, the first thing you'd do would be to put on some warm clothes. As you walked, and the temperature went down even more, you'd keep adding layers of clothes to keep you warm. But by the time you got to South Carolina in April, you'd start taking off those layers, one by one, since you no longer need them to protect you from the weather. Once you hit Florida, you would have discarded almost every piece of clothing you had. I doubt you'd curse those clothes or consider them to have been wrong. More likely you would appreciate the warmth they provided you, be grateful to have had them, and thank each piece as you threw it away for the role it had played on your successful trip. In Chapter 16, I mentioned a good friend who had been in his cocoon for about a year and a half, making some real progress, when his ego, Maya, began fighting back with a vengeance. As we all do, he was experiencing holograms that brought back to life the more difficult judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears he had formed inside the movie theater during his first half years. And when the going got tough, he didn't seem to like how he was feeling. Apparently he thought he had done enough work by then and should only be experiencing holograms of the second half variety. So he began blaming his infinite I for, quote, fucking him over as usual, unquote. He stopped running the process or doing spiritual autolysis and started to justify his judgments, maintain his beliefs, and strengthen his opinions. Every player has free will to decide how they want to react and respond to the holographic experiences they encounter, and this was his choice, to let Maya win this one, at least for the time being, even though he didn't recognize that's what he was doing. He wasn't wrong for making that decision, because that has to be perfect too. But my friend, who in so many ways has been such great support to me in writing this book, helped me to see just how clever Maya can be and gave me the opportunity to emphasize another important point. In the preface to Part 2, I talked about presenting you with models, not belief systems, and that a model is designed to be tested and challenged to see how well it performs. In this case, Maya convinced my friend he was making a legitimate test or challenge to the model rather than escaping the discomfort and leaving her alone to survive in peace, by prompting him to ask questions about the theory of the model, questions that began with why and what if, and I'm not sure I agree that. However, the only valid and legitimate test or challenge to a model is to see how well it performs in application, not in theory. In my friend's particular situation, the model was clearly working perfectly, producing exactly the kind of results it was supposed to. He just didn't like the way it felt at the time. But no one said it was going to feel good all the way through the cocoon, especially if you hit a dark night of the soul. So if there's still discomfort, keep running the process. It's only the ego talking when there's the thought to get out of what you're feeling and go back into your head. And Maya speaks in very sophisticated, inviting, and clever ways. So know this about the ego. You shouldn't underestimate it, you won't outsmart it, and you can't resist it. There's an old story about how you cook a frog. You don't boil a pot of water on the stove and drop the frog in, because it will just jump back out to get away from the heat. Instead, you put the frog into the pot while the water is cool and slowly turn up the heat while the frog sits there until it's boiled. You don't take a big bite out of an onion or it will overpower you. You eat an onion one slice at a time until it's all gone. Annihilating the ego is a similar process. One layer at a time as your infinite eye provides the appropriate holographic experiences. As I said about death, you must meet the ego eye to eye, understand it, accept it, embrace it, appreciate it for what it is and the service it has provided for you, and then quietly and systematically dismantle it one layer at a time until there's nothing left, expecting each new layer to be more difficult than the last, and not quitting until you're done. Chapter 32. Compassion. Question. This whole model seems to me a very selfish way to live. Where's your heart? Where's your compassion for the pain and suffering of others? Answer. I have no interest in justifying or defending selfishness. I will leave that to people like Robert Ringer, who wrote Looking Out for Number One, Ayn Rand, who wrote The Virtue of Selfishness, Bud Harris, who wrote Sacred Selfishness, A Guide to Living a Life of Substance, David Seabury, who wrote The Art of Selfishness, the Hellers, who wrote Healthy Selfishness, Getting the Life You Deserve Without the Guilt, and Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." As for my heart, it is as open as it has ever been. As you drop all judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears, your heart cannot do anything except open wider and wider and be filled with love and appreciation for the perfection of everything, and especially love for your own infinite eye. But compassion is a very different story. It's true, compassion is the new spiritual buzzword, perhaps helped a lot by the Dalai Lama. Like judgment, compassion has been made to seem right and proper and a good thing to have. In fact, being compassionate has become the hallmark of enlightenment and the most important trait a good person must have, in the same way judgment has become a symbol of intelligence and reason. But let's find out what compassion really means. The American Heritage Dictionary defines compassion as the deep awareness of the suffering of another coupled with the wish to relieve it. And the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines it as sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. It should be clear by those definitions that compassion belongs in the first half of the human game, inside the movie theater, and not in the second half. Why? What's wrong with compassion? Nothing is wrong. That would be a judgment. But compassion, as it is defined and practiced, automatically leads a player to judge the experiences of someone else as bad or wrong, to think they have the power to change that person's reality, and to entertain the wish to do so. And none of that is possible or appropriate in the second half of the human game. It also inevitably leads the player who's trying to be compassionate into frustration, sadness, and sometimes even despair. Or, in other words, it leads further into limitation and restriction. Therefore, by its very nature, compassion is not part of infinite joy. It also doesn't feel like joy. It actually feels bad to identify with someone else's pain and suffering. In fact, we're supposed to feel bad for someone else if we're compassionate. I feel bad for them. The synonyms given in the dictionary for compassion are pity and sympathy. I doubt anyone would suggest pity and sympathy feel joyful. In a meeting of the intentional community in Tamara, a young man from Israel stood up and announced his recent revelation that his only job in life was to be happy. Everyone cheered, and a feeling of joy and excitement and enthusiasm filled the room. Then a young woman stood up, the daughter of the guru, and admonished everyone not to forget all the pain and suffering of others. The bubble in the room quickly burst. Try to recall right now what it feels like to be compassionate. Does it feel like joy to you? You can do the same thing with jealousy, for example. Does it make you feel loving to feel jealous? Does it make you feel expansive and powerful? Does it make you feel all warm and fuzzy like love does? In the same way that jealousy cannot be part of infinite love, compassion cannot be part of infinite joy. It's as simple as that. The only way compassion could make you feel good is because you think by being compassionate, you're being a good person. But there's more to talk about. Let's really dissect this thing called compassion, since it's become such a big button in the first half of the human game. Remember that the holographic experiences you perceive are not real, and that your infinite eye is creating your reality. Remember also that the people you see in your holograms, the other people, are actors playing a role for you and reading a script word for word written by your infinite eye. Think again about the analogy of our holographic universe to a total immersion movie, created as an outer experience to give you and your infinite eye an inner experience. Whatever you perceive then in your reality is being played out for you, for your experience, for your benefit, by actors, like a movie or a play. If you went to a play at your local theater, there might be an emotional scene where some character you cared about was killed, or maimed, or raped, or tortured, or starved, or displaced, or abused. If it's a good play with professional actors, a convincing script, and perfect scenery, you should feel what the writer of the play wanted you to feel. Anger, frustration, sympathy, sadness, pain, regret, grief, sorrow, or a whole host of other emotions, none of which come close to joy. But that's what the play was designed to do. Then, after the play, you go next door to the bar for a drink, and there, by chance, are the very same actors you just watched. But they're very much alive, healthy, happy, unscathed, enjoying a beer and joking around with the rest of the troupe. When you see them there in the bar, would you feel the same emotions for them you did during the play? Obviously not. You would probably feel a little silly expressing compassion for the actor you had just watched starving that is now sitting in front of you eating peanuts and popcorn. You might even go over and thank them for what a great job they did and for the experience they gave you, telling them how deeply you felt for them during the play, and then joining in their celebration. The reality you see out there as the physical universe is a movie, a fantastic 3D total immersion movie in which you play a part. But nothing else is different from the play or movie you just watched. Everyone you see in your reality is part of a hologram and is playing a role your infinite eye has asked them to play and which they've agreed to perform at a professional level. When that role is over, they get up from the battlefield, or the hospital bed, or the slums, and revel in the good job they did to convince you the characters they played were real. They gave you a gift of a powerful experience, which your infinite eye wanted and created. But don't confuse things and start to think the scenes they acted out were anything more than actors playing temporary roles at your infinite eye's invitation. Another big problem with compassion is the part that makes you want to relieve or alleviate someone else's suffering. Frankly, although it's cloaked in a very acceptable social veneer, it is the height of arrogance to think we know better than their own infinite eye what experiences another person should be having. Even Mahatma Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." He didn't say, "Go out and change the world into the way you wish to see it," or "Go out and change other people's experiences into the way you think they should be." In the same way you trust your own infinite eye to create the most appropriate experiences for you, we can trust the other person's infinite eye to create the most appropriate experiences for them, regardless of how those experiences look to you or me on the surface. In fact, there is no other player who appears in your holographic reality whose situation is your responsibility to change. Nor do you have the power or authority to change it. Their experiences have been as carefully chosen for them by their infinite eye as yours have been for you. It's time we respect that, and respect and trust the choices of other infinite eyes as well as our own, and not think we know better what they should be experiencing. Besides, this desire to relieve or alleviate someone else's suffering cannot do anything but produce frustration and anger and depression, since you have no power to do anything about it. All you will do is try, and most times fail and feel worse in the end. This is why compassion is such a limiting concept that belongs strictly to the first half of the human game. R. Buckminster Fuller said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." End of quote. The concept of compassion, by its very nature, tends to make us ignore this wisdom and fight against what we see happening in the world. Many peace workers, for example, take up the slogan, say no to war and violence. But the mere act of thinking or acting against war and violence because of compassion is indeed fighting the existing reality. But wait a minute, you protest. Are you saying I should do nothing when I see another's pain and suffering in my hologram? Are you suggesting I sit back and simply watch while a child gets beaten, or a woman raped, or people die from starvation or disease? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying at all. But rather than compassion in the first half that can only lead to more limitation, empathy rather than sympathy, and ethics and excitement will determine your reaction in the second half of the human game. Here's what I mean. Once you have run the process on those holographic experiences you encounter as you start the second half, anytime you have felt discomfort with someone or a particular situation, you will view those incidents of pain and suffering that might come into your hologram very differently. But there is something extremely important to remember. As long as you feel discomfort, and that includes the discomfort of compassion, you are still assigning power out there, and there is still judgment. Only when you can see someone else's pain and suffering without the judgment it is bad or wrong or needs to be changed, can you cleanly take any action. Then you are free to follow your excitement and joy in any specific circumstance. For example, I'm often asked what I would do if a hologram popped up where a child was being beaten in front of me. I honestly cannot give you a generalized answer because so much of it depends on the situation. But my own ethics might lead me to want to do something about it, since I am the caretaker of my holographic experiences my infinite eye has created for me. Maybe I would step in between the adult and the child and inform the adult I do not judge what she or he is doing, but I request she or he beat me instead of the child, and I would not resist. However, that's just one possibility. Under no circumstances would I judge what was going on as right or wrong, or good or bad, nor judge the actors playing their parts, nor think I must or should change the action itself. But right now I can imagine my personal feeling of excitement and joy would be to prefer to be beaten myself than to watch the child being beaten. I would also never strike back or try to defend myself. Neither would Mahatma Gandhi, as he proved time and again. Okay, that's a particular individual situation. What about the millions of people starving in the world? Those getting killed and maimed every day in countless wars and other violence? Those who are homeless and hungry and sick, which is a fair number of the Earth's population if we watch and believe the TV news. What about them? Be the change you wish to see in the world, Gandhi said. So here's another tough concept. In spite of all the pain and suffering we are shown out there, our only job as a player in the second half of the human game is to reclaim the power we assigned out there in the first half, and take the roller coaster ride back to infinite joy, infinite power, infinite wisdom, infinite abundance, and infinite love. It is solely our responsibility to live our own reality. In fact, when our holograms include pictures of pain and suffering out there, it is primarily because our infinite eye is trying to show us where we assigned power in the first half and give us the opportunity to reclaim it. These holographic images of pain and suffering are not for us to do something about them, but about us as individual players to do something about us. Put simply, someone else's pain and suffering that finds its way into our holograms is an opportunity to leave judgment and compassion behind and explore a new way of feeling and acting. Remember what we said about other people in chapter 24. Other people serve three main purposes in your holographic experience. 1. To reflect something you think or feel about yourself. 2. To give you the gift of information or insight. And 3. To set something in motion to support you. This includes all the other people who you are now judging to be in pain and suffering. And nowhere on that list does it say other people serve the purpose of having you save them from their experiences. Along the way, however, we will start to feel excitement inside, excitement that is prompting us to do something. So if I see someone else in pain and suffering in my hologram, and I do not judge it or fall into the trap of wanting to change it, I might find it totally joyful and exciting to take some action anyway. What if someone in my hologram asks me for help? I give it gladly, as long as it brings me total joy to do so, without judgment or discomfort, as long as I have no expectations of the outcome. Please don't get me wrong. I am often touched on a very deep level when I see someone in my hologram in pain or suffering, and I will give my help if asked, if I can do it without the intention to fix, change, or improve things. But I also know it is impossible for them to be a victim, just as it is impossible for me to be a victim of anyone or anything out there. So I offer my support in any way I can while they have such a difficult and limiting experience, because I know they are playing in the first half of the human game. This is really no different than giving encouragement to someone on the first hill of a roller coaster, supporting them in any way possible to hang in there. This may be a crude example, but it's the best I can think of at the moment. Someone calls out to me from the roller coaster going up the hill. They say they're getting sick and need help. I will do everything in my power to get to them, bring them a barf bag, hold their hair back while they get sick, offer them some encouraging words, or give them whatever assistance I can at the time. What I won't do is judge their experience as wrong, or that it should be different and needs to be changed, or sympathize with them, or pity them, or try to get them off the roller coaster. I've been there. It doesn't feel good, and I know it. I also know the experience they're having has been carefully chosen for them by their own infinite eye, and it is perfect for them at that moment. After all, they cannot ride the roller coaster without going up the first hill. There's an old saying in the recovery business that an alcoholic will not quit until they've had enough to drink. A Course in Miracles says, if your brothers ask you for something, do it, because it doesn't matter. So if your alcoholic brother asks you for a drink, exactly what is the compassionate thing to do? According to recovery principles and A Course in Miracles, maybe it would be to give them the drink they ask for, rather than judging and trying to change the experience they're having because you know what's best for them. There is, of course, a natural desire that all the players we meet in our holograms experience the same joy and power and abundance and love we have. And when we see someone else in our hologram not in that condition, we can easily wish something different for them, and want them to join us in the joy and power and abundance and love of the second half. But what we cannot do is to judge their situation to be bad or wrong, or even that our situation is better than theirs, and then try to do something to change their circumstances. Many years ago, I gave up the idea of trying to save the world, or even end war on this planet, when I realized war had been a very valuable experience in my own life, if nothing else, to show me who I was not, and how I did not want to behave. And who was I to try to limit other people's experiences who might benefit from the same opportunities. Today, I am excited about finding out how to download other frequencies from the field, as will be explained in Chapter 36, that create a peaceful and harmonious life on planet Earth, but without any judgment that all people should live that way, or that the way other people are living now is somehow wrong. The point the young Israeli man was making in Tamara was that rather than becoming bogged down in someone else's pain and suffering, and feeling that pain and suffering himself, he decided his only job was to be happy, to provide others with the hope and the inspiration and the model of how their lives could be different. I seriously doubt those in pain and suffering want us to join them in their misery. I don't think they want us to pity them or feel their pain. I think instead they would prefer for us to be happy, so they know it is possible for themselves as well. Therefore, rather than compassion in the second half of the human game, we follow our excitement and our joy and our passion, and take whatever actions we feel moved to take in relationship to our holographic experiences, as long as there is no judgment or discomfort involved. After all, the world doesn't need to be saved. It's perfect exactly as it is, down to the smallest detail. Saving the world, as wonderful as it may sound on the surface, is not only the height of arrogance in thinking you know how the world should be, but also one of the most clever temptations the ego, Maya, has come up with to maintain her power and existence. I realize there is a lot of social pressure to be compassionate these days, but in fact, this whole compassion thing is one of the greatest lies that keeps people inside the movie theater, for the simple reason that focusing on compassion for others keeps players from looking at themselves. As long as your time and attention is tied up trying to alleviate the pain and suffering of others, you will never have what it takes to process your own judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears. Instead, you will hang on for dear life to this layer of the ego, this identity you are not, called compassionate. Chapter 33. Robert Scheinfeld. Question. You mention Robert Scheinfeld a lot, but you don't quote him very much, and it's not clear exactly what you think about his work. Answer. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate Robert Scheinfeld and the role he played in my transformation. It was Robert, through his Busting Loose from the Money Game DVD home study course, which is no longer available, who ushered me through the back door of the movie theater and into my cocoon. It was Robert who introduced me to the concept of the human game, and especially the two separate and opposite halves, which explained so much about me and my own life. It was Robert who provided the basic process which I used with success for the first year in my cocoon, letting go of the judgments and beliefs and opinions about what was out there, and reclaiming the power I had assigned to make my holograms real. It was Robert who introduced me to Jed McKenna's Enlightenment Trilogy, which was the next step I needed in my transformation in the cocoon. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to meet and talk with Robert and express that appreciation. I attended one of Robert's live workshops and went through 3 of his home transformational systems, along with following him on Facebook and listening to his Phase 2 Players discourses. I consider Robert to be a fellow scout. But after the first year in my cocoon, I met Robert on the road, and I killed him. Not literally, of course. If you don't recognize the reference, it's from the book Kill the Buddha by Dai Kwang, who said, Zen Master Lin Chi spoke thus, "If you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha." If you meet a patriarch, kill the patriarch. Lin Chi isn't condoning murder, he is using a metaphor to explain the nature of Buddhism. Don't believe what someone says, no matter how holy they are, just because they say it. Listen to their words and then explore them yourself." End of quote. Based on this, Sheldon Kopp then wrote the best-selling book called If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. It was clear to me when I met Robert on the road that he had stopped along his path as a scout and had gotten totally immersed in writing his books and creating his home transformational systems and offering his workshops. But because he stopped, he didn't get far enough to see that his work contained some vital errors which I'm sure he would have realized if he had gone further. Robert has announced he is leaving the scout game now to focus on other things. I'm hoping part of those other things will include going further in his cocoon and correcting his mistakes for his own sake. It's strange, too, because the biggest errors have to do with his wording, and one of the tools Robert suggests using in the second half of the human game is transformational vocabulary. In other words, he quite clearly sees the importance of the language we use, so I have to assume he just didn't get the concept to begin with. For example, what I have called the infinite I, the consciousness on the other side of the field, Robert calls the expanded self. Without belaboring the point, expanded is a judgment just like better or higher, and expanding the self is going in the exact opposite direction we want to go in the cocoon, toward the no-self. Robert also talks about taking back your power as part of his process. But we, as players, never had any power to begin with, so how could we take it back? But perhaps the most important mistake was a phrase that sounds really catchy and cool, and very much appeals to the New Age crowd: the son of who you really are. Robert uses this in his cloud metaphor, explaining that what we are doing in the cocoon is drilling holes in the cloud cover so the sun of who we really are can come shining through. People love this because it feeds the ego so well. Everyone likes to think they are something more than just a player, that they are really their infinite consciousness who is running the show. Now, it's true the whole point of the cocoon is the discovery of who I am not on the way to finding out who I am. But to suggest the end result is letting the sun of who we really are shine through the cloud cover simply continues the illusion we are anything more than a player representing our infinite I in the human game. It perpetuates the false knowledge and layers of the ego that say we really are our infinite I after all. Lastly, as I mentioned before, Robert's process is excellent in addressing the judgments, beliefs, and fears we have created while in the first half of the human game, as long as you're dealing with what you think is out there. But it is simply not designed, or very workable, in finding the fears that lie underneath or detaching from the layers of false identities that make up the ego. I would love to be able to recommend Robert's work since it meant so much to me. And you could read and watch it with a discriminating eye, on the lookout for the errors, and it might be something helpful to you as well. You can start at robertscheinfeld.com. But I have known too many people who have followed Robert and call themselves Phase 2 players who don't have a clue about the deep fears and layers of the ego Robert's work does not address, and who go around talking about the reality they are creating and the joy of reconnecting with the sun of who they really are. That being said, I want to acknowledge that Robert has done a wonderful job of making this information available in the back of the movie theater and presenting it in such a way that many more human adults are entering their cocoons. He is a marketing genius, no doubt. And of course, even his errors are perfect. I also want to point out, like Robert, I stopped while in the cocoon to write this book, and maybe other books, we'll see. I went farther than Robert, but I still stopped. My only hope is that I have not made the kind of major mistakes Robert did. Chapter 34. Jed McKenna. Question. You seem to use a lot of quotations from Jed McKenna, who isn't a real person, or at least that's not his real name. Do you think he's actually for real? Answer. I said Robert Scheinfeld stopped along his path as a scout. I think Jed McKenna also stopped at a certain point to write his Enlightenment trilogy. He claims to have emerged from the cocoon as a butterfly when he says, "All that scorched earth wandering wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. I still had my own personal deconstruction to do, which is how I spent almost the next 2 years, until I got to a place called done. My reality now is the awakened, untruth, unrealized state. I spent the next 10 years trying to make sense of this new world, a non-world in which a non-I nevertheless seemed to reside." End of quote. But I don't know whether that's true, for a couple of reasons. One, I don't believe it's possible for Jed to write his 3 books without stopping in the cocoon and delaying the final transformation into a butterfly. Maybe in the years after he finished his last book, he went on to become a butterfly. That's entirely possible, since we've never heard from him again. Reason 2? Well, I'll get to that. First, I'll answer your question. When I read the Enlightenment trilogy by Jed McKenna the first time through, I knew immediately this man, whoever he really was totally authentic. He had to have actually experienced what he was writing about, or he couldn't use those words and describe his condition so perfectly. I knew here was a man, another scout, who stood in full view of the Pacific Ocean, and he was expressing the very same thoughts and feelings I have come to know can only be thought and felt when one has reached this point along the journey. For example, Jed says, "I am here, live, on the scene, and I have chosen to describe it as I see it. I don't defer. I don't rely. If what I describe conflicts with the 10,000 other reports, no matter how revered those reports and those who filed them may be, then to me those reports are nothing more than fable and folklore and should be consigned to the dust heap of history. The simple fact is that I am here, and here doesn't look all that much like anyone says it does, and I'm not going to waste my time or anyone else's pretending otherwise. It should be noted that here isn't mist-enshrouded or poorly lit. It's neither mysterious nor mystical. My knowledge is unflawed and my vision is unobstructed. This is a tricky point to make, but a critical one. I am not interpreting. I am not translating. I am not handing something down that was handed down to me. I'm here, now, telling you what I see in the most straightforward possible terms. It's very simple. Enlightenment is truth realization. Not only is truth simple, it's that which cannot be simpler, cannot be further reduced. Enlightenment isn't when you go there, it's when there comes here. It's not a place you visit and then remember wistfully and try to return to. It's not a visit to the truth, it's the awakening of truth within you. It's not a fleeting state of consciousness, it's permanent truth realization. It's not a place you visit from here, this is a place you visit from there. The enlightened view life as a dream, so how could they possibly differentiate between right and wrong or good and evil? How can one turn of events be better or worse than another? Of what real importance is anything in a dream? You wake up and the dream is gone as if it never was. All the characters and events that seemed so real have simply vanished. The enlightened may walk and talk in the dream world, but they don't mistake the dream for reality. The truth, though, is that nothing is really wrong. Nothing is ever wrong, and nothing can be wrong. It's not even wrong to believe that something is wrong. Wrong is simply not possible. If something isn't wrong, then nothing needs to be made right, which would mean that nothing needs to be done. The enlightened have awakened from the dream and no longer mistake it for reality. Naturally, they are no longer able to attach importance to anything. To the awakened mind, the end of the world is no more or less momentous than the snapping of a twig. The wise see the same in all, says the Gita. The wise are impartial, says the Tao. The enlightened cannot conceive of anything as being wrong, so they don't struggle to make things right. Nothing is better or worse, so why try to adjust things? Once you get past the notion that duality, by any name, is bad, and unity, by any name, is good, you also get past any need to help or save anyone. I, for instance, don't do what I do because I think it needs doing. I am moved by no ethical or altruistic motive. I don't think something is wrong and that I have to make it right. I don't do it to ease suffering or to liberate beings. I do it simply because I'm so inclined. I heard that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was very happy with his reclusive life in the foothills of the Himalayas and may never have rejoined society, but that he began hearing the name of an Indian city in his head. It simply appeared unbidden in his thoughts. When he finally mentioned it to someone, they advised that the only way to get the name of the town out of his head was to go there. He did, got swept into a speaking engagement, and the whole transcendental meditation movement grew out of it. That makes sense to me. You observe events, and you allow the flow of things to do the steering, and you go where you go. Fear, regardless of what face it wears, is the engine that drives humans as individuals and humanity as a species. Simply put, humans are fear-based creatures. It may be tempting to say that we are equal parts rational and emotional, balanced between left and right brain, but it's not true. We are primarily emotional, and our ruling emotion is fear. Fear of the hollow core. Fear of the black hole within. Fear of non-being. Fear of no self. The fear of no self is the mother of all fears, the one upon which all others are based. No fear is so small or petty that the fear of no self isn't at its heart. All fear is ultimately fear of no self. This trajectory I'm on will take me as close to non-existence as anyone can get and still have a body. In other words, I will continue to channel progressively less and less energy into my dream state being. My teaching will reduce down to its most refined and least tolerant form. My interest will withdraw from the world, and I will become as minimal as a person can be. I had spent years as a closet butterfly, moping around with caterpillars and dreaming highly fictionalized dreams of becoming a butterfly. I knew that I was distinctly different from the caterpillars. I knew that an uncrossable chasm separated us, that I wasn't one of them any more, that they weren't like me, nor I like they. I knew I was able to communicate with them only in the most superficial sense, based on my rapidly fading memories of their language and habits. What it took me a while to understand, though, was that the reason I wasn't one of them anymore was because I was something else, and that the difference was absolute. I had earned admission to a whole new reality, but I hadn't yet passed into it because no one explained to me that this new order of being I had become was what caterpillars meant when they said butterfly. And then one day, there it is. Nothing. No more enemies, no more battles. The sword that seemed welded to your hand can now be dropped. Once your fingers can be pried from it, there's nothing left to contend against, and nothing left that must be done. And there will never be anything that must be done ever again. Enlightenment isn't like graduating high school only to start college, or even finishing college to enter the real world. It's the final graduation. No more hunt, no more chase, no more battle. Now you can go out into the world and do whatever you want. Learn guitar, jump out of airplanes, write books, tend grapes, whatever. Those quotes are from just the first few pages of Book 1, Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damnedest Thing, and there are 3 books in all, definitely worth the read. That being said, it is also clear to me Jed and I took different routes to get to the same place, which results in a disagreement on several key points. I want to discuss those in some detail, mainly to let you know different scouts will have different ways of expressing the path, and that Jed and I are not 100% in agreement except about the end result. For example, his underlying tone when discussing human children is one of judgment and criticism for being asleep within the dream state. He says, "Human childhood is petty and fearful and grating. It's a hideous affliction." End of quote. Jed obviously does not share the concept of the movie theater being intentionally designed to create limitation and restriction. If he did, he couldn't judge the state of being a human child, but would instead see it as a perfect part of the game. Or, for example, Jed's constant reference to Maya as the goddess of delusion and as the personification of the ego can easily lead one to believe there is some force out there, some entity, some power that is intentionally trying to keep people from joy and abundance and truth. He says, Maya might best be understood as the intelligence of fear. She is the keeper of the kept, the warden of the dream state. It is Maya who bestows upon us the miraculous and life-giving power to see what's not and to not see what is. It is Maya who makes the dream state possible and escape from it nearly impossible. She enables the dream state to exist, and if you wish to awaken from it, then it's her you must destroy, layer by layer. End of quote. Which brings me to my third question about Jed, his warlike vocabulary and his attitude that there is an enemy to be fought and destroyed. He says, real spirituality is a savage insurrection, the oppressed rising up in a do-or-die bid for freedom. It's not something people do to improve themselves or earn merit or impress friends or to find greater joy and meaning in life. It's a suicidal assault on a foe of unimaginable superiority. People who take this stuff seriously have no need of me or anyone else, only of finding the next question, of taking the next step, of finding the next enemy and fighting the next battle. People who don't take this stuff seriously are invariably looking for ways to occupy and distract themselves so they don't have to take any real steps or fight any real battles. End of quote. Jed's third book is even entitled Spiritual Warfare. So I have to assume the route Jed took across the Rocky Mountains required a lot of fighting to get through, a lot of battles with the elements, the Indians, the wild animals, a lot of machete work to cut through the trees. whereas the route I took had very little of that. In fact, one of the key steps inside the cocoon is the realization there is no enemy, no out there, no duality of it or them versus me. Jed also makes no mention of quantum physics, or of any real scientific understanding that it isn't real, it's just a game. Instead, the general tone of his books is to take all this very seriously. He says, personal revolution is fueled by emotional energy of the purest intensity. That intensity comes from focus, and that kind of focused emotional energy doesn't look like love or tranquility or compassion. It looks like seething rage or ugly business, but that's how it works. Suicidal discontent, that's how revolutions are won, and that's why they so seldom are. Rockets aren't launched into space on chanting and prayers, and escaping the ego's gravity requires an equivalent amount of explosive force. We have to take all the emotional energy we normally blast out in 1,000 directions to keep our dream state characters animated and focus it on a single point. It's all or nothing. End of quote. But, in fact, it's all just a game. A wonderfully complex, exciting, challenging treasure hunt for the truth. Finally, Jed uses his first book, Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damnedest Thing, to describe his process and transformation inside the cocoon. He speaks of the state of freedom from the movie theater in glowing terms, and the reader should come away from that book wanting to be where Jed is. Then Jed spends half of Book 2, Spiritually Incorrect Enlightenment, describing how difficult it is to get where he is, giving excellent examples from one of his students, Julie, of her own spiritual autolysis process. A realistic look at the time everyone will spend inside the cocoon. The other half of the book is Jed patting himself on the back for being the first ever to figure out Melville's Moby Dick. In his third book, Spiritual Warfare, Jed bends over backwards to try to convince the reader they don't want to go where he is, but to stay inside the movie theater as a human adult instead. He says, the most important distinction to be made between these two states is that human adulthood makes sense and enlightenment doesn't. The main benefit most spiritually inclined people can derive from having a clear understanding of what it really means to be truth realized is not so they can achieve it, but so they can dispense with it and reset their spiritual sights on something worthier than enlightenment, which is, literally, the biggest nothing of all time. End of quote. I could mention other smaller areas where I disagree with Jed, but I'm not trying to be picky. I simply want to point out that Jed's viewpoint is biased by the route he took across the Rocky Mountains, and although his description of the Pacific Ocean is extremely accurate, his way of getting there is not the only way, and not everyone has to go through what he went through. Nor will everyone feel the same way Jed does when he arrives. I don't, for example. I also want to emphasize that you will find isolated sentences or two throughout Jed's books that contradict the general tone of his writing, like, "It's all just consciousness. You are just consciousness. There is nothing else." Maya, it should be remembered, is not an actual archdeity thwarting us from on high. Maya is inside us, a part of us. She is not a she, and she's not external to you. She's inside you, and those layers are the stuff of which your ego is made. Instead of adopting a warlike posture, we must, counterintuitively, lower our shields and defenses. This seems confusing until we understand that we are both the protagonist and the antagonist in this conflict. both attacker and defender. This is the paradoxical nature of the struggle. We cannot win by fighting. The very thing that fights, that resists, is the thing we seek to overthrow. End of quotes. And Jed does, occasionally, express his appreciation for all the things he seems to judge and criticize so frequently, even Maya, when he says, "I can't think of anything more fascinating or lovely or worthy of appreciation than Maya, the architect of delusion." And the idea that the dualistic universe is anything other than the grandest and most wonderful of all blessings is laughably absurd. End of quotes. So if you read Jed's books with a discriminating eye, overlook the general tone, and be watchful for the key sentences, you are in for a real treat. In my opinion, the Enlightenment Trilogy is required reading for anyone who wants to become a butterfly. Chapter 35. U. G. Krishnamurti. Question. A lot of things you have said sound like stuff I have read by U. G. Krishnamurti. Answer. I've read a lot of things from U.G., no relationship to J. Krishnamurti, that I like too. There are other things I've read where he seems to contradict himself a lot, things I disagree with, or maybe things I don't totally understand. But here's a sample from this anti-guru of what I like. People call me an enlightened man. I detest that term. They can't find any other word to describe the way I am functioning. At the same time, I point out that there is no such thing as enlightenment at all. I say that because all my life I've searched and wanted to be an enlightened man, and I discovered that there is no such thing as enlightenment at all. And so the question whether a particular person is enlightened or not doesn't arise. I don't give a hoot for a 6th century BC Buddha, let alone all the other claimants we have in our midst. They are a bunch of exploiters, thriving on the gullibility of the people. The holy men are all phonies. They are telling me only what is there in the books. That I can read. Do the same again and again. That I don't want. Experiences I don't want. They are trying to share an experience with me. I'm not interested in experience. As far as experience goes, for me there is no difference between the religious experience and the sex experience or any other experience. The religious experience is like any other experience. I am not interested in experiencing Brahman. I am not interested in experiencing reality. I am not interested in experiencing truth. They might help others, but they cannot help me. I am not interested in doing more of the same. What I have done is enough. I had arrived at a point where I said to myself, Buddha deluded himself and deluded others. All those teachers and saviors of mankind were damned fools. They fooled themselves. So I'm not interested in this kind of thing anymore. So it went out of my system completely. You hope that you will be able to resolve the problem of desire through thinking, because of that model of a saint who you think has controlled or eliminated desire. If that man has no desire as you imagine, he is a corpse. Don't believe that man at all. Such a man builds some organization and lives in luxury which you pay for. You are maintaining him. He is doing it for his livelihood. There is always a fool in the world who falls for him. They are all liars, fops, fakes, and cheaters in the world who claim they have searched for and told the truth. All right, you want to find out for yourself what this truth is. Can you find out? Can you capture the truth and hold it and say, "This is truth"? Whether you accept or reject, it's the same. It depends on your personal prejudices and predilections. So, if you want to discover the truth for yourself, whatever it is, you are not in a position to either accept or reject. You assume that there is such a thing as truth. You assume that there is such a thing as reality, ultimate or otherwise. It is that assumption that is creating the problem, the suffering for you. Look here, I want to experience God, truth, reality, or what you will, so I must understand the nature of the experiencing structure inside of me before I deal with all that. I must look at the instrument I am using. You are trying to capture something that cannot be captured in terms of your experiencing structure, so this experiencing structure must not be there in order that the other thing may come in. What that is, you will never know. You will never know the truth because it's a movement. It's a movement. You cannot capture it. You cannot contain it. You cannot express it. It's not a logically ascertained premise that we are interested in. So, it has to be your discovery. What good is my experience? We have thousands and thousands of experiences recorded. They haven't helped you. It's the hope that keeps you going. If I follow this for another 10 years, 15 years, maybe one of these days I will, because hope is the structure. I discovered for myself and by myself that there is no self to realize. That's the realization I am talking about. It comes as a shattering blow. It hits you like a thunderbolt. You have invested everything in one basket, self-realization, and, in the end, suddenly you discover that there is no self to discover, no self to realize. And you say to yourself, "What the hell have I been doing all my life?" That blasts you. Nothing. That's the discovery. So-called self-realization is the discovery for yourself and by yourself that there is no self to discover. That will be a very shocking thing. Why the hell have I wasted all my life? It's a shocking thing because it's going to destroy every nerve, every cell, even the cells in the marrow of your bones. I tell you, it's not going to be an easy thing. It's not going to be handed over to you on a gold platter. You have to become completely disillusioned. Then the truth begins to express itself in its own way. I have discovered that it is useless to try to discover the truth. The search for truth is, I have discovered, absurd, because it's a thing which you cannot capture, contain, or give expression to. You see, my difficulty with the people who come to see me is this. They don't seem to be able to understand the way I am functioning, and I don't seem to be able to understand the way they are functioning. How can we carry on a dialogue? Both of us have to stop. How can there be a dialogue between us both? I am not trying to sell anything here. It is impossible for you to simulate this. This is a thing that has happened outside the field, the area in which I expected, dreamed, and wanted change, so I don't call this a change. I really don't know what has happened to me. What I am telling you is the way I am functioning. There seems to be some difference between the way you are functioning and the way I am functioning, but basically there can't be any difference. How can there be any difference between you and me? There can't be. But from the way we are trying to express ourselves, there seems to be. I have the feeling that there is some difference, and what that difference is all that I am trying to understand. So this is the way I am functioning. Put it simply, I can't follow a very complex structure. I have that difficulty, you see. Probably I'm a low-grade moron or something. I don't know. I can't follow conceptual thinking. You can put it in very simple words. What exactly is the question? Because the answer is there, I don't have to give the answer. What I usually do is restructure the question, rephrase it in such a way that the question appears senseless to you. If somebody asks me a question suddenly, I try to answer, emphasizing and pointing out that there is no answer to that question. So I merely rephrase, restructure, and throw the same question back at you. It's not game playing, because I'm not interested in winning you over to my point of view. It's not a question of offering opinions. Of course, I do have my opinions on everything from disease to divinity, but they're as worthless as anybody else's. It's the questioner that creates the answer, and the questioner comes into being from the answer, otherwise there is no questioner. I am not trying to play with words. You know the answer, and you want a confirmation from me, or you want some kind of light to be thrown on your problem, or you're curious. If for any of these reasons you want to carry on a dialogue with me, you are just wasting your time. You'll have to go to a scholar, a pundit, a learned man. They can throw a lot of light on such questions. That's all I am interested in this kind of a dialogue, to help you formulate your own question. Try and formulate a question which you can call your own. Your natural state has no relationship whatsoever with the religious states of bliss, beatitude, and ecstasy. They lie within the field of experience. Those who have led man on his search for religiousness throughout the centuries have perhaps experienced those religious states. So can you. They are thought-induced states of being, and as they come, so do they go. Krishna consciousness, Buddha consciousness, Christ consciousness, or what have you, are all trips in the wrong direction. They are all within the field of time. The timeless can never be experienced, can never be grasped, contained, much less given expression to, by any man. That beaten track will lead you nowhere. There is no oasis situated yonder. You are stuck with the mirage. You see, people usually imagine that so-called enlightenment, self-realization, God-realization, or what you will, I don't like to use these words, is something ecstatic, that you will be permanently happy, in a blissful state all the time. These are the images they have of those people. There's no relationship at all between the image you have of that and what actually is the situation. That's why I very often tell people, if I could give you some glimpse of what this is all about, you wouldn't touch this with a barge pole, a 10-foot pole. You would run away from this because this is not what you want. What you want does not exist, you see. We don't want to be free from fear. All that we want to do is play games with it and talk about freeing ourselves from fear. You see, the search takes you away from yourself. It is in the opposite direction. It has absolutely no relation. The search is always in the wrong direction, so all that you consider very profound, all that you consider sacred, is a contamination in that consciousness. You may not like the word contamination, but all that you consider sacred, holy, and profound is a contamination. Understanding is a state of being where the question isn't there anymore. There is nothing there that says, "Now I understand." That's the basic difficulty between us. By understanding what I am saying, you are not going to get anywhere. The consciousness which is functioning in me, in you, in the garden slug and earthworm outside, is the same. In me it has no frontiers. In you there are frontiers. You are enclosed in that. Probably this unlimited consciousness pushes you. I don't know. Not me. I have nothing to do with it. It is like the water finding its own level. That's all. That is its nature. That is what is happening in you. Life is trying to destroy the enclosing thing, that dead structure of thought and experience which is not of its nature. It's trying to come out, to break open. You don't want that. As soon as you see some cracks there, you bring some plaster and fill them in and block it again. It doesn't have to be a so-called self-realized man or spiritual man or God-realized man that pushes you. Anything, that leaf there, teaches you just the same if only you let it do what it can. We have very strange ideas in the religious field. Torture this body, sleep on nails, control, deny things. All kinds of funny things. What for? Why deny certain things? I don't know. What is the difference between a man going to a bar for a glass of beer and a man going to a temple and repeating the name of Rama? I don't see any basic difference. I am not against escapes, but whether you escape through this avenue or that avenue, an escape is an escape. You are escaping from yourself. What you do or do not do does not matter at all. Your practice of holiness, your practice of virtue, that is socially valuable for the society, but that has nothing to do with this. By conserving sex energy, you are not going to improve yourself in any way. It is too silly and too absurd. Why have they laid so much stress on that? Abstinence, continence, celibacy is not going to help to put you in this state, in this situation. You don't know what is good. You only know what is good for you. That's all you are interested in. That's a fact. Everything centers around that. All your art and reason centers around that. And I am not being cynical. That's a fact. Nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying anything against it. The situations change, but it is that which is guiding you through all situations. I'm not saying it is wrong, you see. If it is not so, something must be wrong with you. As long as you are operating in the field of what they call the pair of opposites, good and bad, you will always be choosy in every situation. That is all. You cannot help doing that. A moral man is a chicken. A moral man is a frightened man, a chicken-hearted man. That is why he practices morality and sits in judgment over others. And his righteous indignation. A moral man, if there is one, will never, never talk of morality or sit in judgment on the morals of others. Never. Questioning my actions before and after is over for me. The moral question, I should have acted this way, I should not have acted that way, I should not have said this, none of that is there for me. I have no regrets, no apologies. Whatever I am doing is automatic. In a given situation, I am not capable of acting in any other way. I don't have to rationalize, think logically, nothing. That is the one and only action in that particular situation. You are asking me, has anything any purpose? Look here, a lot of meanings and purposes have been given to you. Why are you still looking for the meaning of life, the purpose of life? Everybody has talked of the meaning of life and the purpose of life. Everybody. Answers have been given by the saviors, saints, and sages of mankind. You have thousands of them in India. And yet today you are still asking the same question, has life any purpose or meaning? Either you are not satisfied, or you are not really interested in finding out for yourself. I submit that you are not really interested, because it's a frightening thing. It's a very frightening thing. Is there any such thing as truth? Have you ever asked that question for yourself? Has anybody told the truth? In a way, the whole of life is like a great big dream. I am looking at you, but I really don't know anything about you. This is a dream world. There is no reality to it at all. When the experiencing structure is not manipulating consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, then the whole of life is a great big dream, from the experiential point of view, not from this point of view here, but from your point of view. You see, you give reality to things, not only to objects, but also to feelings and experiences, and think that they are real. When you don't translate them in terms of your accumulated knowledge, they are not things. You really don't know what they are. Courage is to brush aside everything that man has experienced and felt before you. You are the only one, greater than all those things. Everything is finished. The whole tradition is finished, however sacred and holy it may be. Then only can you be yourself. That is individuality. For the first time you become an individual. As long as you depend upon somebody, some authority, you are not an individual. Individual uniqueness cannot express itself as long as there is dependence. My life story goes up to a point, and then it stops. There is no more biography after that. Desirelessness, non-greed, non-anger, those things have no meaning to me. They are false. And they are not only false, they are falsifying me. I'm finished with the whole business. End of quotes. I said at the beginning of this chapter, there are other things I've read where he seems to contradict himself a lot, things I disagree with, or maybe things I don't totally understand. Apparently, Yu-Ji agrees when he says, I am always negating what I am saying. I make a statement, but that statement is not expressing all that is being said, so I negate it. You say I am contradicting myself. I am not contradictory at all. I negate the first statement, the second statement, and all the other statements. That is why sometimes it sounds very contradictory. I am negating it all the time, not with the idea of arriving at any point, just negating. There is no purpose in my talking. Chapter 36. The Future. Question. I thought I just read in chapter 27 that time doesn't exist. What are you doing calling the last chapter in this book the future? Answer. You're right. But I also said in chapter 20 that I can still dream. And that's what I'd like to do. Dream a little about the future, as long as I don't get attached to the fulfillment of those dreams. Actually, toward the end of your time in the cocoon, you begin to see ripples in the universal ocean, movement in the Earth environment template. And sometimes it's fun to speculate, in a general sort of way, where those ripples might be heading. I'm seeing a couple ripples I want to focus on for a few minutes before I end this book, simply because I find some of this stuff fascinating. The first ripple I see is that the drama and conflict and pain and suffering and war and violence and hardship in the Earth environment template are actually increasing across the world, despite, or perhaps as explained in chapter 18, in part as a result of, the resistance of more and more peace workers. Some of the developed countries haven't been so hard hit yet, but they will be as the global economic system becomes more chaotic. It seems like every day the news is full of more deaths from war and violence, and from natural disasters as well. More people are out of work around the world, more barely living from hand to mouth, more losing their homes, more with no idea how they or their families will survive. More economies are failing, More governments are collapsing or being challenged, and more theories of everything are falling by the wayside. For me, however, this is not a bad thing at all. It may actually be signaling the beginning of a mass exodus out of the movie theater, with large numbers of players gathering around the garden ready to eat from the tree of life. In other words, the screws may be tightening, the rubber band may be stretching to its limits, the situation deteriorating until more and more human children are willing to stand up in their seats and yell, "We're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore." And more human adults realize what's in the back of the movie theater isn't working either and head for the door. Sometimes things have to get pretty bad for that to happen. But I've been overly optimistic before, so I can't be sure. As Alan Shore said in one of his closing arguments in an episode of Boston Legal, "When the weapons of mass destruction thing turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up. They didn't. Then when the Abu Ghraib torture thing surfaced, and it was revealed that our government participated in rendition, a practice where we kidnap people and turn them over to regimes who specialize in torture, I was sure then the American people would be heard from. We stood mute. Then came the news that we jailed thousands of so-called terrorist suspects, locked them up without the right to a trial, or even the right to confront their accusers. Certainly we would never stand for that. We did. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive illegal domestic surveillance on its own citizens, you and me. And I at least consoled myself that finally, the American people will have had enough. Evidently, we haven't. In fact, if the people of this country have spoken, the message is, we're okay with it all. Torture, warrantless search and seizures, illegal wiretappings, prison without a fair trial, or any trial, war on false pretenses. We, as a citizenry, are apparently not offended. There are no demonstrations on college campuses. In fact, there's no clear indication that young people even seem to notice. End of quote. Maybe it's an encouraging sign that young people aren't demonstrating on college campuses or otherwise protesting in general. Perhaps it means they are beginning to realize that changing things isn't working. But they also see the futility in resistance, the purposelessness in joining groups in the back of the movie theater, the rampant contradictions and inconsistencies in all judgmental belief systems. Maybe young people are simply numb, fed up with the whole thing, but with no clue of what to do, no concept yet of a viable alternative to the outdated and inaccurate models of life found inside the movie theater. Perhaps they're ready for this human game model. As I asked in Chapter 21, how much more pain and suffering and limitation and restriction is required before millions of players surrender, understand it is their own judgments and resistance causing that pain and suffering, and are willing to begin processing the false knowledge and layers of the ego that are part of life inside the movie theater. So ripple number 1 appears to me headed in the direction of more pain and suffering, and says to me the roller coaster is nearing the top of the first hill when things get really tough and the going gets really rough for those inside. Ripple 2, going in the opposite direction, is that there are also signs more and more players are waking up from their dream state, or at least waking up within their dream state. You recall I talked about a template or matrix for the Earth environment in Chapter 24. Let's speculate a little on how that template might change from time to time. Remember the field? Lynn McTaggart called it a field of all possibility. And Dr. John Hagelin said, "The foundation of the universe is a single universal field of intelligence, the fountainhead of all the laws of nature, all the fundamental forces, all the fundamental particles, all the laws governing life at every level of the universe." End of quote. And Fred Alan Wolf said, "We can't explain what we do see as matter unless we picture that these matter particles somehow come out from or emerge from these thought wave patterns." End of quote. An infinite eye goes to this field and chooses certain specific wave frequencies to create the holographic experiences it wants for its player. But rather than having to recreate the car and the buildings and the briefcase and the galaxies and the solar system and this planet each time, it uses a template in the field I have called the Earth environment for its basic total immersion movie set, and adds whatever unique aspects it wants for its individual player. Then it downloads that hologram to its player's brain. I also talked about the human brain receiving these holographic wave frequencies from the field and translating them into our physical reality, like a radio that receives sound wave frequencies and translates them into music and words we can hear. And this is where the player comes in. Let me explain. A radio has a certain range of frequencies it can receive and translate into sound. The AM range is 535 to 1605 kilohertz, and the FM range is usually 88 to 108 megahertz, although this can vary slightly from country to country. Obviously, there are sounds to be heard outside of those frequencies, but a radio receiver doesn't pick them up. This is also true for humans, who can hear only a limited range of sounds as well. Dogs, dolphins, and other creatures can hear different frequencies than we do, for example. There is some scientific evidence that our brains are receiving a much wider range of frequencies than we are able to perceive. Michael Willicke from the University of Rochester conducted a study which led him to conclude that perhaps as much as 80% of the frequencies we receive are locked in our heads, unable to be perceived. Regardless of how wide a range of frequencies the human brain might be able to receive from the field, it's clear there is a limited range of frequencies we can actually perceive. What exactly is determining this range of frequencies? The judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears we form in the first half of the human game. So at any given moment, the Earth environment template in the field available to an infinite eye to create a hologram for its players is limited to a certain range of frequencies the player can perceive based on their judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears. I want to say that a third time because it's so important. Our judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears limit the range of frequencies our infinite eye can use from the field to download a holographic experience we can perceive. This is demonstrated so well by Dr. Bruce Lipton in his exercise with the two sets of colored glasses and the pictures of fear and love. With that in mind, I want to take a look at the frequency range of our current template of the Earth environment. But this is going to be a little tricky because of the wording and the analogy to a radio. I want to emphasize before we start that no frequency is better or worse than any other frequency. And when I use certain numbers to represent frequencies, it does not mean one number is better or worse just because it's a higher or lower number. For example, the music at 91.3 on a radio dial is no better than the music at 104.7. It's just a different frequency with different content. You may prefer to listen to one kind of music over another, but that doesn't make it better. To help remove all judgments about the numbers, I have intentionally reversed the numbers from what we normally expect to see. In fact, doing it this way is more in keeping with our roller coaster analogy, where the higher you go on the first hill, the more limitation you experience. And now, here's where this audiobook gets a little difficult, because in the ebook version I use some graphs and charts to better explain what I want to say. I hope I can paint a good enough picture with my words that you will understand. Okay, let's arbitrarily say the total frequency range in the field available to our infinite eye to create a holographic experience goes from 0 to 2000. At 0, we find total joy and abundance, and at 2000 we find catastrophic disasters and plagues. However, most players today can only perceive part of that frequency range, let's say 500 to 1800, because of their judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears. At 500 is beauty, sunsets, happiness, and love. And at 1800 is war, violence, abuse, and fear. If we were to graph the players on Earth and the frequency ranges they could perceive, it might look like a bell curve, with very few whose experiences consist mainly of total joy and abundance, approaching no limitations on one end of the bell curve, also very few experiencing catastrophic disasters and plagues, complete limitation on the other end of the bell curve, and the vast majority with an Earth environment template ranging from beauty, sunsets, happiness, and love to war, violence, abuse, and fear. At any given time, it's interesting for me to look at the template for the Earth environment that appears in my own hologram, to see the frequency range and how it is changing. As I said, it seems to me more and more players are experiencing more war, violence, abuse, and fear. The sheer numbers of people who are in pain and suffering have seemingly increased dramatically in the last 50 years compared to previous templates. What this tells me is more and more players are nearing the pinnacle of limitation in the first half of the human game, and more infinite eyes might be ready for their players to enter the second half. Did I make that clear? Rather than judging the increasing deaths occurring so frequently now from natural catastrophes or the crash of the world financial system or the melting of the glaciers as bad, they may simply be an indication the amount of limitation appearing in the Earth environment template is reaching its maximum threshold and could result in more players moving into the second half of the human game. As I said, like a rubber band being stretched to its limits before it breaks. So how can we start perceiving a different range of frequencies in the Earth environment template? By letting go of our judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears on an individual player level. We have the free will and the ability to do that. And in the process, we will shift the frequency range of the Earth environment template we can perceive, and therefore the frequency range our infinite eye can use to create our holograms, from a range of 500 to 1800, for example, to 200 to 1500. Now, war and violence and abuse and fear, which were at 1800, are no longer perceivable. They still exist, as all frequencies do, but we simply do not experience them anymore as individual players. This is what happens as a player moves further in their cocoon as they run Robert's process and do their spiritual autolysis, letting go of their judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears, and especially stripping away layers of the ego. They simply stop having the limiting experiences they had inside the movie theater appear in their holograms. On the other end of the spectrum, we begin to experience more than just beauty, sunsets, happiness, and love as we move toward unlimited joy and abundance. I want to emphasize it's not necessary to send new information to the field to create these new frequencies, as some teachers have suggested, because the field, by definition, already contains all information and all possibilities, and because we as players cannot create anything anyway. It is also not necessary to change the number of DNA strands, or achieve a certain level of enlightenment, or eat only organic food, or meditate, or anything else in order to begin to perceive this new range of frequencies. All that is required is to let go of the judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears that determined the frequency range for the first half of the human game. Now the interesting question is, what if a large number of players were to leave the movie theater, make their way through their cocoon, let go of their judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears, and were able to perceive this new frequency range? What effect would that have on the Earth environment template in the field, the one the Infinite Eyes use when creating holographic experiences for their players? In other words, what might be the effect, if any, if a large number of players begin the process of transforming into butterflies? A British biologist, Rupert Sheldrake, has a theory he calls morphic resonance, or morphic field theory. Basically, the theory says when enough members of a species have adopted the same behavior, a critical number is reached, called a critical mass, and this new behavior is automatically and rapidly transferred by morphic resonance to the entire species. Sheldrake says, the term morphic fields is more general in its meaning than morphogenetic fields, and includes other kinds of organizing fields in addition to those of morphogenesis. The organizing fields of animal and human behavior, of social and cultural systems, and of mental activity can all be regarded as morphic fields which contain an inherent memory. End of quote. Sheldrake's theories have been heavily criticized by mainstream biologists for many years. However, some quantum physicists have supported Sheldrake's hypothesis, and even David Bohm suggested it was in keeping with his own ideas of what he called the implicate and explicate order. I know from my direct experiences of testing and challenging this model that an individual player can significantly change the range of frequencies its own infinite eye can use to create its holographic experiences by letting go of judgments, beliefs, opinions, and fears and stripping away the layers of ego. So I wonder, if more and more players were to enter their cocoons, would the transformational process become faster and easier for each new generation? Would a critical mass eventually be reached where all the players on Earth automatically walk out of the movie theater and into their cocoons? Would the Earth, as a player itself, no longer need a movie theater and begin an entirely new game? That's ripple number 2, and I'd like to stay around long enough to see where it goes. I hope you have enjoyed this audio presentation of Butterflies Are Free to Fly, a new and radical approach to spiritual evolution. You are invited to write a book review, or offer comments, or download the free ebook version of this book by visiting www.butterfliesfree.com. Thank you for listening. This is Stephen Davis, the author, encouraging you to go further. Now enjoy a song called Happy by my son's band, Even the Sun.
The bounces around, and now it gets louder, prouder, louder. The waves ricocheting on the way back to the stage. They've been changed by the crowd and the way they behave. And here we are, we come so far, and we love to play the bar, and we get laid and paid with free beer. Now we stand in front of you and do the things we love to do, and we're just glad that you're all here. Yeah, I'm happy. Yeah. A battle of sadness I can stand. I'm back in love with life again. I'm happy. Yeah. Battle of sadness I can stand. I'm back in love with life again. Tonight we hit the road, another show, another load, and yo, we won't forget that girl in the front row. It's people like her and you that get us up and pull us through and make us see that it's true that you all care.